The pen slipped from TuTien's hand the moment the officer spoke. It hit the table with a sharp sound that echoed unnaturally loud in the small government office, cutting through the quiet like something breaking. Not just a moment, but something deeper, something fragile that neither of them realized was about to shatter. "I'm sorry," the officer said, his tone official, detached. "But according to our records, this woman is already married." Silence. Heavy. Unbelievable. Jack didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even breathe properly for a second. "What?" His voice came out low, dangerously calm. TuTien's face went pale instantly. "That's not possible," she said quickly, shaking her head, her voice trembling. "There must be a mistake." The officer turned the screen slightly toward them. "Name, Tử Tiên. Date of birth matches. Registered marriage 3 years ago." The words dropped like stones. 3 years ago. Exactly when? Jack's eyes slowly shifted toward her. And in that moment something changed. "Jack!" TuTien turned to him immediately, panic rising in her chest. "You have to believe me, I don't know anything about this." But Jack didn't answer. He was still looking at the screen. Processing. Replaying. Calculating. 3 years ago. That was before they met. Before everything. Before their son. "You never told me you were married," Jack said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And that made it worse. "I wasn't," she insisted, her voice breaking now. "I swear I don't even know who that is." Jack finally looked at her. And the look in his eyes was not anger. Not yet. It was something colder. Doubt. "You expect me to believe that?" he asked. Tử Tiên hớt đờ đốt. "Yes." She stepped closer, reaching for him. "Because it's the truth." He took a step back. Not aggressively, but clearly. And that small movement cut deeper than anything else. Inside the office, people had started to notice. Whispers. Glances. Judgment. But none of that mattered. Because for TuTien, the only thing that mattered was the man standing in front of her, looking at her like a stranger. "Jack, please." Her voice softened, almost pleading now. "We've been through so much. You know me." Jack's jaw tightened. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "I thought I did." The words hit like a slap. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "This is a misunderstanding," she said again, her voice weaker now. "We can check again, we can fix this. Or maybe..." Jack cut in, his voice sharper now. "This is something you never told me." "No." She shook her head violently. "I would never hide something like that from you." "Then explain it," he said. "I can't," she cried. "Because I don't know." The room fell silent again. And this time there was no way out of it. Their son, standing beside TuTien, looked up at them with confused eyes, his small hand tugging lightly at her sleeve. "Mama, what's wrong?" That innocent voice broke something inside her. She immediately knelt down, pulling him into her arms, trying to hide her tears, trying to stay strong. But her whole body was shaking now. It's okay," she whispered, even though nothing was okay. Jack watched, but didn't move. Because now, everything he thought was real was uncertain. "Mr. Jack," the officer said carefully, sensing the tension. "If you want, you can file a verification request. It may take time, but..." "No need," Jack said coldly. Tử Tiên Froger. "Jack?" He turned away. "I've heard enough." The words were final. Sharp. Unforgiving. "Jack!" She stood up quickly, her voice rising. "You're just going to walk away like this?" He stopped for a second, but didn't turn back. "I don't even know who you are right now," he said. And then he walked out. The door closed behind him, and with it everything collapsed. TuTien stood there, completely still, as if her soul had been left behind in that room, her arms still holding their son, her tears falling silently now, because there was no strength left to cry loudly anymore. Not when the person she trusted the most didn't trust her. Days passed, but nothing changed. Jack didn't call, didn't come back, didn't ask. And that silence was louder than any accusation. At night, TuTien sat alone, her son sleeping beside her, his small hand still holding onto her sleeve even in his dreams, as if afraid she might disappear too. She looked at him, and something inside her hardened. Not anger, not hate, but decision. The next morning before the sun fully rose, she packed quietly. Simple clothes. A few belongings. Nothing more. She didn't leave a message. Didn't call Jack. Because she already knew he wouldn't come. At the doorway she paused for a moment, looking around at everything they had built, everything they had lost. Then she picked up her son and walked away, back to the village, back to where she still knew who she was. Meanwhile, in the city, Jack sat alone in a dark room, a glass of alcohol in his hand, the city lights flickering outside like distant memories, his phone lying untouched on the table, her name still there, still waiting, but he never pressed it, because every time he thought about it, that word came back. Married. And the doubt never left. The glass hit the table harder than necessary. Another drink. Then another. Then another. Because it was easier to drown the thoughts than to face them. Days turned into weeks. And slowly Jack changed. Not into something stronger, but into something broken. Until one day someone else noticed. His mother. She stood at the doorway watching him in silence as he poured yet another drink, his eyes dull, his movements careless. Nothing like the son she knew. Nothing like the man who once controlled everything. "What happened to you?" she asked. Jack didn't respond, didn't even look up. And that was enough. Because she knew something was wrong. And if her son wouldn't find the truth, she would. And somewhere far away, TuTien walked along a quiet path in the village, her son holding her hand, her face calm but her eyes still carrying the shadow of something unfinished. Because even though she left, her heart hadn't. And the truth was still waiting to be found. The glass slipped from Jack's hand and shattered against the floor. But this time, he didn't reach for another one. He just stood there, frozen. Because the words his mother had just said were still echoing in his head, over and over again, refusing to settle, refusing to be ignored. It's not her. The silence that followed felt different from all the others. Not empty, not suffocating, but sharp, awakening. "What did you say?" Jack asked slowly, his voice rough, as if it had forgotten how to speak properly. His mother stood across from him, holding a file in her hand, her expression serious. No longer cold, no longer distant but focused. "I checked everything," she said. "The marriage record is real, but it doesn't belong to TuTien." Jack's breathing stopped for a second. "Explain." "There's another woman," she continued. "Same name, same birth year, but different identity number." The world tilted. Jack's eyes widened slightly, because suddenly everything began to make sense. Every word she had said, every tear, every moment he chose not to believe her. "You're sure?" he asked. His voice was quieter now. Not defensive, not angry, just afraid. His mother stepped closer, handing him the documents. "I wouldn't come to you like this if I wasn't." Jack looked down at the papers, at the truth, and for the first time since that day the doubt disappeared, replaced by something far worse. Regret. His fingers tightened around the file. "She told me," he whispered. "She told me it was a mistake." His chest tightened painfully. "And I didn't believe her." The weight of that realization hit harder than anything else. Because it wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about trust. And he had broken it. Without another word, Jack grabbed his keys. "Where are you going?" his mother asked. He didn't stop. "To fix what I destroyed." The engine roared to life. And this time Jack didn't hesitate. The road back to the village felt longer than ever before. Every second stretched. Every kilometer felt like punishment. Because now, he wasn't running away from something. He was chasing what he had lost. Flashbacks flooded his mind. Her voice. Her tears. The way she looked at him that day. Not angry. Not accusing. But hurt. Deeply hurt. "Jack, please believe me." The words echoed. And this time he heard them. Clearly. Too clearly. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though she wasn't there to hear it. When he finally arrived, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in soft orange and fading gold. The village quiet, familiar, unchanged. But he was not. He stepped out of the car, looked around, and for a moment he hesitated. 'Cause what if he was too late? Then he saw her, near the small garden behind the wooden house. Tử Tiên, kneeling on the ground, her hands covered in soil, just like before. Their son beside her, laughing softly as he tried to mimic her movements, his small hands digging into the earth. The sight hit Jack like a wave, because everything he had pushed away was right there, alive, real, still waiting. He took a step forward, then another, slowly, carefully, as if approaching something fragile, something he didn't deserve to touch anymore.
Tử Tiên pauset.
As if she felt it, she turned and saw him. Time stopped. For a second, neither of them moved. The distance between them wasn't far, but it felt like everything. Their son looked up. Then suddenly, "Daddy!" He ran, without hesitation, without doubt, straight into Jack's arms. Jack dropped to his knees instantly, catching him, holding him tightly, his hands trembling as he pulled the child close, his eyes closing as if he needed to feel this to believe it was real. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." The boy laughed, hugging him tightly. "You came." Jack swallowed hard. Yes, but his eyes were on her.
Tử Tiên stood still.
Her expression unreadable. Not cold, not warm, just guarded. Jack slowly stood up, still holding their son, but he didn't step too close. Not yet, because this time he understood distance. "It was a mistake," he said. "No hesitation. No excuse. Just truth. I checked everything. It wasn't you."
Tử Tiên din tờ red pawn.
Her hands slowly brushed the dirt off her palms. "I told you," she said quietly, and that was all. But it carried everything. Jack lowered his head slightly. "I know." A pause. Then, "I'm sorry." The words came out heavier than before, as now they meant something. Silence settled again, but it wasn't the same as before. This silence was waiting. "You didn't believe me," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Jack nodded. "I didn't. And now?" He looked at her, directly.
Idol. Tử Tiên eyes flicker.
Just slightly, but this time she didn't cry. "I don't know if that's enough," she said. Honest, real, and that was harder than anger. Jack took a small step forward, careful. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," he said. "I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn it." The wind moved gently between them, carrying something new. Not resolution, not yet, but possibility. Their son looked between them, confused, then reached out with both hands. "Come, simple, innocent, but powerful."
Tử Tiên hesita.
Just for a moment, then she stepped closer. Not all the way, but enough. Jack didn't move further, didn't rush, because this time he knew. Love wasn't about holding on, it was about staying, even when it was hard. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, the three of them stood there, closer than before, but not completely whole. Not yet. And somewhere in the distance life continued, uncertain, unfinished, but no longer broken. Because sometimes, the hardest part of love isn't losing someone, it's learning how to deserve them again. And Jack was just beginning that journey.